In this problem, I'm going to be doing addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division of fractions. I'm going to be writing my answer in two different ways. When I'm done adding these fractions, I have to write my answer in exact form as either a whole number, a proper fraction, or a mixed number, and it must be in simplest form. Then, I will use a calculator to find a decimal approximation to the answer, and if I have to do any rounding, I will round to the nearest thousandths, and I'll indicate that it's just an approximation using this symbol as opposed to saying that it's equal to the value that I write. The rules for adding and subtracting fractions indicate that before I can add the fractions, I need what's called a common denominator. Let me copy the problem down. I'm going to leave some room here because I'm going to be writing something to help me find a common denominator. In fact, I may find what's called the least common denominator. To find a common denominator, what you can do is simply multiply the denominators. 4 times 10 is 40, and this would be a common denominator, but it may be easier to do the problem if you find what's called the least common denominator. If you add the fractions using 40 as your common denominator, it will work. You'll just have a little more simplification to do at the end. Because the numbers are simple enough, it makes sense to me to find the least common denominator, so there's another common denominator that's smaller than 40 that will work. So I must think of a number that both 4 and 10 divide into that's smaller than 40. It turns out that's 20. 4 goes into 25 times, and 10 goes into 20 twice. So what I'm going to do is, without changing the value of my fraction 3/4, rewrite 3/4 as a fraction with 20 in the denominator. I'm going to do this using multiplication. Because multiplication of fractions does not need a common denominator, whatever number I put here will simply get multiplied by the 4, and I'm supposed to get that to come out to be 20. So what number do I multiply 4 by to get to 20? That would be the number 5. 5 times 4 is 20. So that I don't change the value of my fraction 3/4, in mathematics the only thing I can multiply by without changing the value is the number 1. So to make my fraction here equivalent to the number 1, I will multiply the numerator by 5 as well. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 1 times 3/4 is still 3/4. So it's important to realize that I'm not changing the value of my fraction, I'm just changing the way it looks. Again, to multiply fractions, you do not need a common denominator. You simply multiply the numerators. 3 times 5 is 15. As I said before, 4 times 5 is 20. 15 twentieths has the same value as 3/4. They're both equal to 0.75. Now I'm going to do the same procedure to the fraction 9/10. It just plays out a little differently because I need to know what number do I multiply 10 by to get to 20. That would be the number 2. If I multiply the numerator of this fraction by 2 as well, you can think of it as multiplying 9/10 by the number 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. When you multiply by 1 in math, it does not change the value of this fraction. Again, to multiply fractions, multiply the numerators. 9 times 2 is 18. 10 times 2 is 20. Now that I have a common denominator, in my case the smallest one possible, I can add the fractions by just copying my common denominator and adding the numerators together. 15 plus 18 is 33. This is called an improper fraction. If the directions indicated that I could leave my answer in this form, I would be done. But if you read the directions, we are to write our answer as a whole number or a proper fraction or a mixed number in simplest form. This is not a whole number. It's not a proper fraction because a proper fraction has the numerator smaller than the denominator. So the only thing left for me to do is to write my answer as a mixed number. So I need to know how many times does 20 divide into 33. 20 divides into 33 one time. If I multiply 1 times 20 and subtract, I get a remainder of 13. I can take that remainder and divide by the 20, and what I've done is written my improper fraction as a mixed number. 33 twentieths has the same value as the mixed number 1 and 13 twentieths. Since I've done no rounding, this is an exact answer. 3/4 plus 9/10 is 1 and 13 twentieths. It's called a mixed number because it has both a whole number, the number 1, and a fraction in its form. Now I need to go to a calculator and get an approximate value. You could either turn your calculator on and type 33 divided by 20 to find that it's equivalent to exactly 1.65, Or you could write the answer as 1 plus 13/20. You'll see that it's the same value, 1.65, just written as a mixed number as opposed to an improper fraction. The question was allowing me to round my answer to the nearest thousands. If there was rounding involved, I would indicate that it's not an exact answer using this symbol. But since in this particular case it's not an approximate answer, you could indicate that it's an exact answer by writing equals. If you wanted to indicate to somebody that you actually rounded to the nearest thousands, you could, if you wished, put an extra 0 there, as this would be the thousands place. Let's do another example except with multiplication. This problem is going to be much quicker. If you compare the last problem with the new problem, I'm going to be multiplying the fractions rather than adding them. This is much easier because to multiply fractions you do not need a common denominator. You simply multiply the numerators. 2 times 5 is 10. Multiply the denominators. 3 times 6 is 18. And you have the answer as a proper fraction. My numerator is smaller than my denominator, but it is not in simplest form. This is especially apparent when both your numbers are even. So for example, 10 is an even number, 18 is even. That means 2 divides into both evenly. 2 divides into 10 5 times, and 2 divides into 18 9 times. So as a proper fraction in simplest form, my answer is 5/9. Now I will move to a calculator to approximate the value of 5/9. 5 divided by 9 comes out to be 0.555 repeating forever. So I'm going to be rounding my answer to the nearest thousands, which means the third decimal place. So I will indicate that I'm rounding by using the approximate symbol as opposed to the equal symbol. Since my answer was repeating fives forever, and I want to round to the thousandths place, that's this place right here, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, and since the digit just to the right of that is 5 or higher, in fact it's a 5, I will round this digit up to a 6. So I will put a 5 in the tenths place, the hundredths place, but in the thousandths place I will round the 5 up to a 6. In this example I'll be dividing fractions, which is very similar to multiplying fractions in that you do not need a common denominator. To divide fractions, you simply copy the first fraction, 7/8, change the division to multiplication, and then reciprocate the second fraction, which means to flip it upside down. Instead of 6 divided by 7, you write it as 7 divided by 6. Because with multiplication you do not need a common denominator, we simply multiply the numerators. 7 times 7 is 49. And you multiply the denominators. 8 times 6 is 48. This is an improper fraction, and the directions indicated that I was not allowed to write my answer as an improper fraction. It's not a whole number, it's not proper, so I must write it as a mixed number. So 49 divided by 48 can be thought of as that 48 divides into 49 one time, and if you multiply 1 times 48, you get 48, subtract to get the remainder of 1, which means that 48 goes into 49 one time with a remainder of 1. You divide that remainder by 48 to get your improper fraction written as a mixed number. So here is my question. I can say that this is exactly equal to 1 and 1/48. Now I'm going to move to my calculator and type out 49 divided by 48, or just to show you that it has the same value, you could have written 1 plus 1/48. Either way, you get a value of 1.0208. We are to round to the thousandths place. The 0 is in the tenths place, the 2 is in the hundredths place, and this 0 here is in the thousandths place, but I will round the 0 up to a 1 because the digit just to the right of that is 5 or higher. So my answer is 1.021. So the answer to my problem to the third decimal place was 1.021. To indicate that my answer is not exact and that rounding occurred, you can say that 7/8 divided by 6/7 is only approximately 1.021 to let people know that rounding occurred. For my last example, I will take 4/3 and I will subtract 1/9. I like to leave room in here when I do these kinds of problems where I have to find a common denominator. Remember that whenever you add or subtract a fraction, you need the denominators to be the same. That's not true with multiplication and division, but for addition and subtraction, you must find at least a common denominator, or you can find a least common denominator. Because it's simple, I'm going to be finding the least common denominator. I need to know the smallest number that 3 and 9 both divide into. It turns out that 3 divides into 9 twice, so I'm thinking 9 would be my least common denominator. 9 goes into 9 one time. 3 divides into 9 twice. They both divide into the number 9 evenly. So my goal is to have my fractions so that both denominators have a 9 in the denominator. Well, this fraction already has a 9 in the denominator, so it does not need to be changed. So I will just copy the subtraction of 1/9 down. But to figure out what my first fraction would be without changing its value, I ask myself, what would I multiply the number 3 by to get 9? Because with multiplication of fractions, you do not need a common denominator. You simply multiply the denominators and the numerators. So 3 times 3 is 9, so I will get the desired denominator there. As to not change the value of my fraction 4/3, I will multiply by 3/3, which is equivalent to the number 1. 4/3 times 1 is 4/3. So without changing the value of my fraction, I can rewrite it as 4 times 3 is 12, 3 times 3 is 9, so I've written 4/3 in an equivalent form as 12/9. Now that the denominators are the same, they're both 9, I will copy my common denominator, and then I will subtract my numerators as indicated by the problem. It was subtraction, so 12 subtract 1 is 11, which is an improper fraction because my numerator is bigger than my denominator. So I will say that 9 divides into 11 one time with 2 left over. If you like, you can think of this as 11 is being divided by 9. 1 times 9 is 9. When you subtract, you get 2 left over as a remainder, and you are to divide that remainder by the 9. So 11/9 is a mixed number, is 1 and 2/9. Because I didn't do any rounding in my answer, I can say that the answer is exactly 1 and 2/9. Then I will move to a calculator to get the approximate solution. You could either type the 11/9, the improper fraction version of my answer, or you could write 1 plus 2/9. That's the mixed number that we gave here. And you get the same answer. We are to round to the third decimal place, the thousandths place. Since the digit just to the right of that, the fourth place, is a number smaller than 5, I will not round this number up. I will leave my answer 1.222. Because my answer is only an approximation, not the exact answer, I will indicate this to people by writing the approximate symbol rather than an equal symbol. My answer is approximately 1.222.